Hey, monkey! Wrong jungle! The zoo's that way! Officer Bradley Morrison's cruel voice exploded across the courthouse plaza. He jabbed his finger like a spear, pointing away from the building. The distinguished black man in the expensive charcoal suit stopped dead on the marble steps. Morrison's partner, Jake Stevens, erupted in hysterical laughter, banging the car door with his fist. Two officers nearby bent over, gasping and wheezing. "Look at Mr. Fancy Pants! Someone's lost!" Morrison threw his head back, cackling like a hyena. The other officers made monkey noises, scratching under their arms. Passers-by stopped, some filming with phones, others looking away in disgust. The man turned slowly. His steady gaze locked onto Morrison's twisted face. Have you ever witnessed someone judge a book by its cover, only to discover they were holding a mirror to their own ignorance? Judge Nathaniel Washington had always believed that justice lived in the details. At 45, he understood that truth emerged not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments of preparation. His morning routine never varied. Coffee at 5:30 a.m., black and bitter. Case files spread across his kitchen table like puzzle pieces waiting to be assembled. The suburban house felt too big since his wife passed 3 years ago, but their twin daughters, Sophia and Maya, still called it home during college breaks. Today's stack contained something different. Police misconduct cases, civil rights violations, a federal mandate demanding accountability from Metro City's police department. The irony wasn't lost on him. A black federal judge tasked with cleaning up a system that had failed people who looked like him for generations. The radio crackled from his countertop. Breaking news this morning. Protesters gathered outside Metro City Courthouse, demanding police reform following recent allegations of racial profiling. Washington sipped his coffee, scanning incident reports. Officer Bradley Morrison's name appeared repeatedly. 15-year veteran. Multiple civilian complaints. 0 disciplinary actions. The pattern painted itself clearly across the pages. His phone buzzed. A text from Sophia. "Dad, be careful today. Saw the news about the protests. Love you." Washington smiled, straightening his burgundy tie. His daughters worried about him walking into courtrooms where he might be the only black face in a sea of blue uniforms. But someone had to do it. Someone had to stand in that gap between law and justice. The drive downtown took 20 minutes through tree-lined streets that gradually shifted from suburban calm to urban tension. Construction barriers forced traffic into single lanes. Police cruisers seemed to multiply at every intersection. Metro City's federal courthouse rose like a monument to marble and glass. Built in 1923, it had witnessed decades of legal battles that shaped the nation. Today, it would witness something else entirely. Protesters lined the sidewalks, holding signs demanding accountability. Justice for all and reform now bobbed above a diverse crowd of citizens who had grown tired of waiting for change. News vans clustered like metal vultures, their satellite dishes reaching toward a cloudless sky. Washington parked 3 blocks away, choosing to walk the final distance. His leather briefcase contained more than legal documents. It held the hopes of every person who had ever been judged by their appearance rather than their character. The morning air carried sounds of the waking city. Traffic hummed along busy streets. Construction workers hammered against steel. Somewhere in the distance, police sirens wailed their familiar song. Officer Morrison was beginning his shift 6 blocks away, completely unaware that his world was about to collide with the very man he would soon humiliate. Morrison's patrol car reeked of stale coffee and cigarettes. His partner Stevens climbed into the passenger seat, already uncomfortable with the older officer's crude jokes about the protesters. "Look at all these troublemakers," Morrison sneered, adjusting his rearview mirror. "Give them an inch. They take a mile." Stevens said nothing, focusing on his radio instead. At 28, he had joined the force hoping to make a difference. 5 years later, he found himself partnered with a man who represented everything wrong with policing. But speaking up meant career suicide. The blue wall of silence protected officers like Morrison while crushing those who dared to challenge it. The department's morning briefing had been tense. Chief Rodriguez warned about media attention and reminded officers to follow protocol. But Morrison rolled his eyes, whispering to Stevens about political correctness and real police work. Washington climbed the courthouse steps, unaware that Morrison's patrol car was circling the block. The marble felt solid beneath his Italian leather shoes. Each step carried the weight of preparation and purpose. The building's security guards recognized him immediately. "Good morning, Your Honor," they nodded respectfully. Washington returned their greeting with genuine warmth. Respect, he had learned, was earned through consistency rather than demanded through title. His chambers waited on the third floor, overlooking the plaza where protesters continued their peaceful demonstration. The irony struck him again. He would spend the day reviewing cases about police misconduct while officers patrolled the streets below, most of them good people trying to serve their community with honor. But not all of them. Morrison's radio crackled with routine calls, noise complaints, fender benders. Nothing interesting enough to satisfy his need for action. He preferred the old days when police work meant respect through fear rather than community partnership and de-escalation training. The collision course was set. Two men, two worldviews, two different definitions of justice about to intersect in ways neither could imagine. Washington arranged his files, preparing for a day of careful deliberation. Morrison scanned the streets, looking for someone to stop. Neither man knew that history was about to unfold in the most unexpected way possible. Judge Washington's sedan moved smoothly through downtown traffic, its silver paint gleaming under the midday sun. He had left the courthouse for lunch, choosing to drive rather than walk through the crowd of protesters still gathered outside. The car was modest, a 3-year-old Camry that reflected his practical nature rather than his federal salary. 2 blocks from his favorite sandwich shop, flashing red and blue lights exploded in his rearview mirror. Officer Morrison's patrol car lurched behind him, siren whooping once before falling silent. Morrison had spotted the well-dressed black man through the sedan's rear window and felt that familiar itch. A nice car in a nice neighborhood meant one thing to Morrison. Someone was where they didn't belong. Washington's heart sank as he recognized the routine. Hands visible on the steering wheel, no sudden movements. Remain calm. The same instructions he had given his daughters countless times echoed in his mind. Morrison approached the driver's side window with his hand resting casually on his service weapon. His swagger radiated authority and something else: anticipation. Stevens emerged from the passenger seat, already sensing this would be different from their usual stops. "License and registration," Morrison barked without explanation. His voice carried the tone of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. Washington reached slowly for his wallet, narrating each movement. "I'm reaching for my license in my jacket pocket." His voice remained steady despite the familiar knot forming in his stomach. Morrison snatched the documents, barely glancing at them before fixing Washington with a cold stare. "What's a guy like you doing driving around a neighborhood like this?" "I work nearby," Washington replied evenly. The truth, but not the whole truth. Something told him to keep his judicial status private for now. "Work?" Morrison's laugh was sharp and ugly. "What kind of work?" "Delivering something you shouldn't be delivering." Stevens shifted uncomfortably behind his partner, watching the interaction with growing unease. Pedestrians began slowing their pace, sensing the tension crackling in the air. Several pulled out their phones. Morrison's eyes swept over Washington's expensive suit, the leather briefcase visible on the passenger seat, the small American flag pin on his lapel. Everything about this man suggested success and dignity, which only fueled Morrison's resentment. "Step out of the vehicle," Morrison commanded, his voice rising. "I need to conduct a search." "On what grounds?" Washington asked calmly, though his legal mind was already cataloging the constitutional violations unfolding. Morrison's face flushed red. "Don't get smart with me, boy." I said, "Get out." The slur hung in the air like poison. Stevens took a half-step back, glancing nervously at the growing crowd of witnesses. Phones were definitely recording now. Washington complied slowly, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. Years of experiencing this exact scenario had taught him that resistance, even legal resistance, could turn deadly in seconds. "Hands behind your back," Morrison snapped, already reaching for his handcuffs. "For what crime?" Washington's voice remained level, but something flickered in his eyes. Not fear, but a deeper understanding of what was happening. Morrison spun Washington around roughly, pressing him against the car's warm metal. Suspicious behavior, possible drug activity, resisting an officer. The handcuffs clicked into place with mechanical precision. Washington felt the cold metal bite into his wrists as Morrison tightened them deliberately past comfort. The violation was both physical and spiritual, a reduction of human dignity to its most basic elements. "Look what we got here," Morrison announced loudly, playing to the gathering audience. His voice carried theatrical mockery. "Another upstanding citizen just minding his own business." A businessman stopped mid-stride on the sidewalk, his face twisted with confusion. "What did he do?" he called out. Morrison ignored him, forcing Washington away from the car. The judge's expensive shoes scraped against the concrete as Morrison guided him toward the curb. "Sit," Morrison commanded, pointing at the sidewalk like he was training a dog. Washington lowered himself to the concrete, the position designed for maximum humiliation. A successful man reduced to sitting on a sidewalk in handcuffs while pedestrians gawked. Stevens watched his partner perform, recognizing the dangerous territory they were entering. "Morrison, maybe we should call this in," he suggested weakly. "Call what in?" Morrison shot back. "Just a routine stop." "Nothing to see here, folks." But there was plenty to see. Morrison kicked at Washington's legs, forcing them to spread wider. "Comfortable down there? Not used to sitting on curbs, are you? Probably more of a country club type." A woman across the street pulled out her phone, starting to record. "This is wrong," she muttered to her companion. Morrison noticed the phone and puffed out his chest. "Police business, ma'am. Keep moving unless you want to join him." The threat only made more people stop. Office workers on lunch breaks gathered in clusters, their phones creating a digital jury. A food truck vendor left his window to watch. Construction workers set down their tools. Washington said nothing, but his legal mind continued working. False imprisonment, unlawful detention, violation of Fourth Amendment rights, civil rights violations under federal statute. The list grew longer with each passing minute. "Cat got your tongue?" Morrison taunted, squatting down to Washington's eye level. "Where's all that education now? Bet you went to some fancy college, didn't you?" Stevens knelt beside his partner, lowering his voice. "Morrison, this doesn't feel right." "The guy was just driving. He's cooperating. Maybe we should let him go." Morrison's eyes blazed with something beyond anger, a desperate need to maintain control in a world that was slowly changing around him. "He fits the description," he lied smoothly. "What description?" Stevens pressed. "The one from this morning's briefing. Armed robbery suspect, black male, well-dressed, expensive car." Morrison's lies came easily, polished by years of practice. Washington's eyebrows raised slightly. He knew no such briefing had occurred. He had been in meetings with the police chief about these exact kinds of fabrications. A young black teenager in the crowd pulled out his phone, broadcasting live on social media. "Y'all seeing this? They got this man in a suit sitting on the curb for nothing. This is exactly what we're talking about." Morrison noticed the teenager and felt his authority challenged. "You got a problem, kid? Want to join your friend down there?" The teenager held up his hands but kept recording. "No, sir, just exercising my constitutional rights." The irony wasn't lost on Washington. A teenager understood constitutional law better than the officer violating it. Morrison stood and began pacing, his hand never leaving his weapon. "Search the vehicle, Stevens. Let's see what Mr. Fancy Pants is really up to." "We need a warrant for that," Stevens said quietly. "We have probable cause," Morrison snapped. "Drug investigation. Suspicious behavior, resisting arrest." "He hasn't resisted anything," a woman in the crowd called out. Morrison spun toward her, his face red with rage. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back, or you'll be interfering with police business." The woman stepped back but continued recording. Her phone captured Morrison's increasingly erratic behavior, his partner's obvious discomfort, and Washington's dignified silence. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" Morrison hissed, returning to Washington. Sitting there all calm and collected. "Like you own the place." Washington met his gaze steadily. "I think we're all equal under the law, Officer Morrison." The use of his name startled Morrison briefly. He had forgotten about the name tag on his uniform. But he recovered quickly, standing and adjusting his belt with practiced authority. "Equal!" Morrison laughed bitterly, his voice rising for the crowd to hear. "That's rich coming from someone sitting in handcuffs on a curb." The crowd continued growing. Office workers, store clerks, students, even some off-duty police officers who looked uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Their collective presence created an energy that Stevens could feel, but Morrison remained oblivious to. A news van turned the corner, its satellite dish visible above the traffic. Someone had called the media. Washington closed his eyes briefly, thinking of his daughters. This was the America they would inherit, one where success and dignity could be stripped away by prejudice and a badge. But it was also an America where witnesses gathered, where phones recorded truth, where justice might still be possible. He just had to survive what came next. Morrison's radio crackled with static as backup units responded to his call. 2 additional patrol cars rounded the corner, their lights painting the street in alternating red and blue. The cavalry had arrived, and Morrison felt his confidence surge. "What do we have here?" Officer Davis asked as he stepped out of the first backup unit. His eyes swept over the scene. Washington still sitting handcuffed on the curb, Morrison pacing like a caged animal, Stevens looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Drug investigation," Morrison announced loudly enough for the growing crowd to hear. "Suspect was acting suspicious, possible narcotics in the vehicle." Washington's legal mind noted the escalating lies. First, it was suspicious behavior, then armed robbery, now drugs. Morrison was painting himself into a corner with each fabrication. Officer Rodriguez emerged from the second patrol car, younger than the others, but already showing signs of the cynicism that infected the department. "Need us to search the vehicle?" he asked eagerly. "Absolutely," Morrison replied, his chest swelling with authority. "Full search. This one thinks he's special." Stevens tried one more time. "Morrison, maybe we should just issue a warning and—" "Stevens, shut up and do your job!" Morrison snapped. "Search the car." Now. The crowd had grown to nearly 30 people. Office workers held phones at eye level. A street artist sketched the scene from across the road. The food truck vendor had abandoned his customers to watch the spectacle unfold. Washington watched Stevens approach his sedan with obvious reluctance. The young officer opened the driver's door and began searching through the glove compartment, his movements hesitant and apologetic. "Find anything yet?" Morrison called out theatrically. Stevens pulled out the vehicle registration, insurance papers, and a small emergency flashlight. Nothing remotely suspicious. "Just normal stuff," he reported quietly. Morrison's face darkened. He needed something, anything, to justify this escalating situation. Check under the seats. Trunk. These guys are clever about hiding things. Rodriguez joined the search, pulling seat cushions forward and running his hands along the car's interior. Davis opened the trunk, revealing only emergency supplies and a spare tire. "Maybe we should check his briefcase," Rodriguez suggested, pointing to the leather case still visible on the passenger seat. Washington's heart sank. His briefcase contained case files, judicial notes, and documents that would immediately reveal his identity. He wasn't ready for that revelation yet. Something told him to let this play out, to experience the full scope of what countless others had endured. Morrison seized the briefcase like it contained evidence of major crimes. He set it on the car's hood and popped the latches with dramatic flair. Legal documents spilled out, case files with federal court letterhead, a judicial calendar marked with hearing dates. Morrison's eyes scanned the papers, but his mind was too focused on finding drugs or weapons to process what he was actually seeing. "What's all this legal mumbo-jumbo?" Morrison asked, waving a court document in the air. "Are you some kind of lawyer or something?" Washington remained silent, watching Morrison handle federal judicial documents like they were trash. Each rough movement was another violation, another piece of evidence for the civil rights lawsuit that would inevitably follow. "Probably ambulance chaser," Davis chimed in, earning chuckles from Rodriguez. "Look at this fancy briefcase. Bet he's one of those lawyers always suing cops." The irony was lost on them completely. They were manhandling documents from cases involving police misconduct while committing their own acts of misconduct. A woman in the crowd called out, "This is harassment!" "That man hasn't done anything wrong." Morrison spun toward her, his patience finally snapping. "Lady, if you don't back up right now, you're going to jail too." "For what?" she demanded, holding her ground. "Interfering with police business. Obstruction." "Pick a charge!" Morrison's voice had risen to a near shout. Stevens stepped between Morrison and the crowd, his hands raised peacefully. "Everyone just needs to calm down," he said, though his voice carried no conviction. Morrison turned his attention back to Washington, who sat with perfect posture despite the handcuffs cutting into his wrists. The judge's calm demeanor only fueled Morrison's rage further. "You know what I think?" Morrison announced, circling Washington like a predator. "I think Mr. A fancy lawyer here was chasing this neighborhood, looking for houses to rob, or maybe selling drugs to rich white folks." The racial coding in his words was unmistakable. Several people in the crowd shook their heads in disgust. Washington finally spoke, his voice steady and measured. "Officer Morrison, you're making a mistake." "Oh, I'm making a mistake?" Morrison laughed harshly. "The only mistake I made was not searching you more thoroughly." Without warning, Morrison grabbed Washington by the shoulders and forced him to stand. "Spread your legs wider." Arms out. The pat-down was aggressive and invasive, designed more for humiliation than safety. Morrison's hands searched every pocket, every fold of Washington's expensive suit. The violation was intentional and thorough. "What's this?" Morrison asked, pulling out Washington's wallet again. This time he opened it completely, dumping the contents onto the car's hood. Credit cards scattered across the metal surface. Cash fluttered in the breeze. Morrison picked up each item, examining it like evidence. When he reached the small leather folder containing Washington's judicial ID, he barely glanced at it before tossing it aside. "Lots of cash for someone with an honest job," Morrison observed, counting the bills with exaggerated interest. "Where does a guy like you get money like this?" "I work for a living," Washington replied simply. "Doing what? Selling drugs? Pimping? Running numbers?" Morrison's suggestions grew more offensive with each word. The crowd's murmur grew louder. Phones continued recording. A news van had parked across the street, its crew setting up equipment. Rodriguez found Washington's cell phone and handed it to Morrison. "Check his contacts. See who he's been talking to." Morrison scrolled through the phone's call log, his face twisted with concentration. Names like Chief Justice Roberts and Attorney General Williams meant nothing to him. He was looking for street names, gang affiliations, drug dealers. "Lots of government numbers," Morrison noted suspiciously. "You working with the feds?" Informant, maybe? Stevens watched his partner's behavior with growing horror. This had crossed every line imaginable. Morrison, we need to wrap this up. The sergeant's going to want a report. Let him want one, Morrison shot back. I'm conducting a thorough investigation here. Davis and Rodriguez exchanged glances. Even they were beginning to recognize that Morrison had gone too far. But the blue wall of silence held firm. No cop would openly challenge another in front of civilians. A teenager in the crowd had been live streaming the entire encounter. His broadcast had attracted hundreds of viewers, their comments flowing across his screen in real-time outrage. "This is going viral," the teenager announced. "People are sharing this everywhere." Morrison's head snapped toward the kid. "Turn that camera off right now." "It's a public street," the teenager replied confidently. "First Amendment, officer." Morrison took a step toward the crowd, his hand instinctively moving toward his weapon. The gesture sent a ripple of fear through the gathered people, but also strengthened their resolve. Washington watched the scene unfold with the analytical mind of a federal judge. Morrison was unraveling, his behavior becoming increasingly erratic and dangerous. Each action was another violation, another count in the eventual federal indictment. "Officer Morrison," Washington said quietly, "I strongly advise you to reconsider your course of action." Morrison whirled around, his face purple with rage. "You advise me? You don't advise anybody from down there on that curb." He forced Washington to sit again, this time pressing down on his shoulders with unnecessary force. The concrete was rough against Washington's expensive suit, each moment of contact another indignity in a growing list. "Check his shoes," Morrison ordered Rodriguez. "Sometimes they hide drugs in the soles." Rodriguez knelt reluctantly and examined Washington's Italian leather shoes. Nothing. Of course there was nothing. Morrison's radio squawked with chatter from dispatch. Other units were requesting his status. The sergeant was asking for updates. The walls were beginning to close in, but Morrison was too deep into his performance to stop now. "You know what I think happened here?" Morrison announced to the crowd, his voice carrying the theatrical quality of someone who had lost all perspective. "I think our friend here thought he could drive through this neighborhood without anybody noticing. Thought his fancy suit would protect him. The racist implications hung in the air like toxic smoke. Even Davis and Rodriguez looked uncomfortable now. Stevens made one final attempt to salvage the situation. "Morrison, let's just process him at the station and sort this out there." Morrison's eyes lit up with malicious glee. "That's exactly what we're going to do. Let's take Mr. Fancy Pants for a ride." Washington closed his eyes as Morrison grabbed his arm roughly, pulling him toward the patrol car. The crowd protested loudly, their voices creating a chorus of disapproval that followed him to the vehicle. As Morrison pushed Washington's head down and shoved him into the back seat, the judge caught sight of his scattered legal documents still spread across his car's hood, federal court papers blowing in the wind like discarded trash. The irony was perfect and terrible. The very system he had sworn to uphold was about to reveal just how broken it truly was. The patrol car doors slammed shut with the finality of a judge's gavel. The police station's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Morrison dragged Washington through the booking area like a prize catch. Officers looked up from their paperwork, some nodding approval at Morrison's apparent efficiency, others sensing something was off about the whole scene. "What have you got, Morrison?" Sergeant Kelly asked from behind the front desk. His weathered face carried the skepticism of a 20-year veteran who had seen every type of arrest walk through those doors. "Drug investigation," Morrison announced proudly, his chest puffed out with satisfaction. "Caught this one casing houses in the financial district. Suspicious behavior, resisting arrest, the whole package." Washington remained silent, his hands still cuffed behind his back. His expensive suit was wrinkled from sitting on the curb, but his dignity remained intact. He studied the booking area with the careful attention of someone who understood the system from both sides. Stevens entered behind them, carrying Washington's briefcase and scattered belongings. His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the station's air conditioning. Everything about his body language screamed discomfort. "Let's get him processed," Morrison continued, steering Washington toward the booking desk. "Run his prints, full background check. I bet this isn't his first rodeo." Sergeant Kelly pulled out the standard intake form, his pen poised over the paperwork. "Name?" "Nathaniel Washington," came the calm reply. Kelly began typing the information into the computer system, his thick fingers hunting and pecking across the keyboard. The database search would take a few minutes to complete, cross-referencing criminal history, outstanding warrants, and any special flags in the system. Morrison paced behind the desk like a proud hunter, regaling other officers with his version of events. "You should have seen this guy's attitude." Acting all superior, like he owned the place, had a briefcase full of legal papers, probably stolen. The computer terminal chimed softly. Kelly's eyes focused on the screen as information began populating the fields. Name, address, date of birth, all standard information flowing across the monitor in neat digital rows. Then a red flag appeared. Kelly blinked hard, certain he was seeing things. He leaned closer to the screen, his face inches from the monitor. The blood drained from his cheeks as he read the classification code twice, then 3 times. "Morrison," Kelly's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Morrison, get over here, now!" "What's the problem, Sarge?" Morrison asked casually, still basking in the glow of his arrest. "System down again?" Kelly's finger trembled as he pointed at the screen. "Look at this. Look at it carefully." Morrison squinted at the monitor, his brain struggling to process what he was seeing. The words seemed to swim before his eyes. Judicial officer. Federal District Court. "That's got to be a mistake," Morrison stammered, his voice losing its confident edge. "Run it again. The system's probably picking up some other guy with the same name." Kelly's hands shook as he typed the query again. Same result. The classification was unmistakable, confirmed by multiple databases. The man Morrison had handcuffed and humiliated on a public street was Judge Nathaniel Washington of the United States District Court. Stevens dropped the briefcase, its contents spilling across the floor. Legal documents scattered like fallen leaves, each one bearing the federal court's official seal. Case files marked confidential spread across the linoleum. "Oh, God," Stevens whispered, his career flashing before his eyes. "Oh, my God." The booking area fell silent except for the persistent buzz of fluorescent lights. Other officers stopped their conversations and stared at the trio near the computer terminal. Word spread through the room like wildfire, passed in urgent whispers and wide-eyed glances. Morrison's face had gone completely white. His hands trembled as he stared at the computer screen, reading the same classification over and over. Federal judge, the 2 words that could destroy his career, his pension, his life. "This can't be happening," Morrison muttered, backing away from the terminal. "This can't be real." Washington stood perfectly still, his calm eyes taking in every detail of the room's transformation. Officers who had been joking minutes earlier now stood in shocked silence. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that the air itself felt different. Sergeant Kelly approached Washington with the respect reserved for visiting dignitaries. His hands fumbled with the handcuff keys, metal jangling against metal as he struggled to unlock the restraints. "Your Honor," Kelly said, his voice thick with professional courtesy and personal terror, "I am so incredibly sorry. This is a massive misunderstanding." The handcuffs fell away from Washington's wrists with a soft click. He rubbed the red marks where the metal had bitten into his skin, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Morrison stood frozen, watching his world collapse in real time. A federal judge. He had arrested, humiliated, and violated the constitutional rights of a federal judge. The implications crashed over him like a tsunami of consequences. "Officer Morrison," Washington's voice cut through the silence like a blade. His tone was measured, professional, terrifying in its calmness. You have just provided me with a very educational experience about the current state of policing in this city. Stevens began hyperventilating, his breathing rapid and shallow. Other officers backed away from Morrison like he carried a contagious disease. The blue wall of solidarity crumbled in seconds. Kelly grabbed the phone, his fingers fumbling with the numbers. I need to call the chief. And the mayor. And probably the FBI. His voice cracked with each word. Morrison's legs gave out. He sank into a nearby chair, his face buried in his hands. 15 years of police work, his pension, his reputation, everything was gone. Destroyed by his own prejudice and stupidity. Washington straightened his tie and smoothed his wrinkled suit. When he spoke again, his voice carried the full weight of federal authority. Gentlemen, I believe we need to have a very serious conversation about constitutional rights, police procedures, and the consequences of abuse of power. The silence that followed was deafening. The police station erupted into controlled chaos within minutes of Washington's identity being revealed. Sergeant Kelly's phone call to Chief Rodriguez lasted exactly 47 seconds before the chief's voice could be heard shouting through the receiver from 3 feet away. Nobody moves until I get there. The chief's voice crackled through the speaker. Nobody talks to the media. Nobody does anything. Morrison sat slumped in his chair, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. The same hands that had roughly cuffed a federal judge now trembled uncontrollably. Sweat stained his uniform shirt despite the station's aggressive air conditioning. Stevens paced the booking area like a caged animal, his young face cycling through expressions of panic and disbelief. This isn't happening, he muttered repeatedly. This can't be happening. Washington remained perfectly composed, accepting a cup of coffee from a nervous rookie officer who couldn't make eye contact. The judge's calm demeanor only amplified the chaos surrounding him, like the eye of a hurricane watching destruction swirl in every direction. Within 15 minutes, Chief Rodriguez burst through the station doors, his usually pristine uniform disheveled from the frantic drive across town. His face was red with exertion and barely contained rage. Your Honor, the chief approached Washington with the reverence reserved for visiting royalty. I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry I am for this inexcusable incident. Washington sipped his coffee thoughtfully. Chief Rodriguez, your officers have provided me with valuable insight into your department's current training protocols. The words were diplomatically phrased, but carried the weight of an impending federal investigation. Rodriguez understood immediately that his entire department was now under the microscope. Morrison, my office, now. The chief's voice could have cut glass. Morrison stood on unsteady legs, his face ashen. As he passed Washington, he stopped and opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. What could he possibly say? What apology could cover the magnitude of his actions? I didn't know, Morrison finally whispered. Washington's response was measured and devastating. Officer Morrison? Ignorance of my identity doesn't excuse knowledge of the Constitution you swore to uphold. The truth hit Morrison like a physical blow. Even if Washington had been a janitor, a teacher, or unemployed, the violations would have been identical. The badge didn't grant immunity from basic human decency. Rodriguez's office door slammed shut, but the shouting could be heard throughout the station. Words like suspended, investigation, and federal charges drifted through the walls. Other officers found urgent paperwork to complete, avoiding eye contact with anyone involved in the incident. Stevens approached Washington hesitantly, his police academy training warring with his survival instincts. Your Honor, I want you to know that I knew it was wrong. I should have stopped it. Washington studied the young officer with judicial eyes. Officer Stevens, complicity and cowardice often wear the same uniform. What will you do differently next time? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Stevens had a choice to make: continue the cycle of silence or become part of the solution. Within an hour, the station buzzed with incoming calls. The mayor's office demanded updates. The district attorney asked about charges. Internal Affairs launching an immediate investigation. The FBI's Civil Rights Division requested all related documentation. Morrison emerged from the chief's office looking like he'd aged a decade. His badge was gone. His service weapon had been surrendered. The suspension was immediate and without pay pending a full investigation. 15 years, Morrison muttered to no one in particular as he cleaned out his locker. 15 years down the drain. Stevens watched his former partner's downfall with a mixture of sympathy and relief. The toxic influence that had shaped his early career was finally being removed. The department would be different now. It had to be. Washington's phone rang constantly. His daughters called after seeing news reports. Fellow judges offering support. Civil rights attorneys volunteering their services. The incident was already spreading beyond Metro City's borders. A news crew had set up outside the station, their cameras capturing every person entering or leaving the building. The story was writing itself. Respected federal judge arrested by racist cop. Constitutional violations caught on multiple phones. Department forced to confront systemic problems. Rodriguez returned to find Washington finishing his coffee with the same calm he'd maintained throughout the ordeal. Your Honor, Officer Morrison has been suspended pending termination. Officer Stevens will be investigated but has agreed to cooperate fully. The department will implement immediate reforms. Washington stood, straightening his suit one final time. Chief Rodriguez, true justice isn't just about punishment. It's about ensuring this never happens to anyone else. The words carried both forgiveness and warning. The federal courts would be watching Metro City's police department very closely from now on. As Washington walked toward the exit, every officer in the station stood at attention. Respect born from fear, perhaps, but respect nonetheless. The real consequences were just beginning. 3 weeks after the incident, FBI Special Agent Maria Santos stood in Washington's chambers, her briefcase filled with evidence that would reshape Metro City's police department forever. The morning light streaming through the tall windows illuminated stacks of documents, photographs, and video files that told a story much larger than one racist cop. Your Honor, what Officer Morrison did to you was just the tip of the iceberg, Santos explained, spreading photographs across Washington's mahogany desk. Our investigation has uncovered a pattern of misconduct spanning 5 years. Washington studied the evidence with judicial precision. Traffic stop statistics showed Morrison had targeted black drivers at a rate 3 times higher than his colleagues. 17 formal complaints had been filed against him, all mysteriously dismissed or buried in bureaucratic red tape. How many victims? Washington asked. 43 that we can verify. Probably more who were too afraid to come forward. Santos pulled out a thick folder. Construction worker Jerome Williams, pulled over 6 times in 2 years. Never charged with anything. Teacher Patricia Johnson, handcuffed in front of her students during a traffic stop. College student Marcus Reed, beaten during an arrest that was later ruled unlawful. Each name represented a story of humiliation and injustice. Washington's incident had given them courage to speak publicly for the first time. The federal judge's treatment had broken the spell of silence that protected officers like Morrison. The criminal trial began on a Tuesday morning in the same courthouse where Washington normally presided. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Morrison would face justice in the building where he had humiliated a federal judge. U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh had assembled an airtight case. Video evidence from 6 different phones captured every moment of the arrest. Expert witnesses testified about constitutional law and police procedures. Former colleagues described Morrison's pattern of racial bias. Morrison's defense attorney, David Brooks, faced an impossible task. How do you defend the indefensible when it's recorded from multiple angles and witnessed by dozens of people? Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Brooks began his opening statement, my client made mistakes. But Officer Morrison is not a monster. He's a 15-year veteran who served this community faithfully until one very bad day. The prosecution's case unfolded like a masterclass in civil rights law. Phone videos played on courtroom monitors showed Morrison's escalating aggression. Audio recordings captured his racist language. Expert testimony explained how each action violated clearly established constitutional rights. Stevens took the stand as the government's star witness, his voice barely above a whisper as he described years of watching Morrison's misconduct. "I knew it was wrong. I should have stopped it. But I was afraid for my career, afraid of being labeled a snitch." His testimony revealed the toxic culture that had protected Morrison for so long, the code of silence that valued loyalty over justice, the supervisors who ignored complaints, the union representatives who covered up misconduct. Washington testified on the third day, his calm recollection devastating in its precision. He described each constitutional violation in legal terms, explaining how Morrison's actions violated clearly established law that any reasonable officer should have known. "When Officer Morrison handcuffed me without probable cause, he violated my Fourth Amendment rights," Washington explained to the jury. "When he subjected me to racial slurs and humiliation, he violated my 14th Amendment rights. These aren't complex legal concepts, they're basic constitutional protections every officer swears to uphold." The defense tried to paint Morrison as a product of poor training and departmental culture. Brooks called character witnesses who described the officer's community service and charity work. None of it mattered when weighed against the mountain of evidence. Dr. Sarah Williams, a criminology expert from Georgetown University, provided devastating testimony about racial bias in policing. Her statistical analysis showed Morrison's stops followed clear patterns of discrimination. Charts and graphs demonstrated how his behavior differed dramatically when stopping white versus black drivers. Officer Morrison didn't suddenly become racist on the day he arrested Judge Washington, Dr. Williams testified. The evidence shows a consistent pattern of bias that his supervisors should have detected and corrected years ago. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Morrison was found guilty on all counts: deprivation of rights under color of law, false imprisonment, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. The federal charges carried serious penalties, up to 10 years in prison per count. Judge Patricia Martinez, a no-nonsense jurist known for tough sentences, delivered Morrison's fate with clinical precision. "Officer Morrison, you violated your oath, betrayed the public trust, and inflicted lasting harm on your victims and your profession. Your actions were not a momentary lapse in judgment, but part of a deliberate pattern of misconduct." The sentence was 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. Morrison would also pay $50,000 in fines and was permanently barred from working in law enforcement. Stevens received a suspended sentence and community service in exchange for his cooperation. His police career was over, but he avoided prison time. "Officer Stevens," Judge Martinez noted, "your silence enabled these violations. Silence in the face of injustice makes you complicit in that injustice." The civil lawsuit against the city moved faster than anyone expected. Washington's legal team, led by civil rights attorney David Thompson, documented not just Morrison's actions, but the systemic failures that enabled them. Mayor Rebecca Johnson, facing political pressure and potential federal oversight, agreed to a settlement that would transform the department. The city paid Washington $2.5 million in damages, but the real victory was in the reforms. A federal consent decree required the Metro City Police Department to implement comprehensive changes. Body cameras became mandatory for all officers. A civilian oversight board gained real authority to investigate complaints. Training programs were overhauled to emphasize constitutional rights and de-escalation. Chief Rodriguez, facing federal pressure and community outrage, announced his retirement. The new chief, Lisa Brooks, was a reformer from outside the department who had successfully transformed police departments in 3 other cities. "We're not just changing policies," Chief Brooks announced at her first press conference. we're changing culture. Every officer will understand that constitutional rights aren't suggestions, they're requirements. The Morrison case became a national symbol of police accountability. Law schools used the videos in constitutional law classes. Police academies showed the footage as an example of how not to conduct traffic stops. Civil rights organizations cited the case in their advocacy for federal police reform legislation. Morrison's conviction sent shockwaves through police departments nationwide. If a federal judge could be treated this way, what did it mean for ordinary citizens? The message was clear. No one was above the law, and no one was beneath its protection. 6 months after sentencing, Morrison sat in federal minimum security prison, his fall from authority complete. The man who had wielded a badge like a weapon now wore an orange jumpsuit and worked in the prison laundry. Justice had been served, but at a cost that extended far beyond one racist cop. The system was finally beginning to change, one case at a time, one conviction at a time, one reformed department at a time. Real justice, Washington reflected, wasn't just about punishment. It was about transformation. 1 year later, Judge Washington sat in his chambers reviewing case files, but today felt different. Through his window, he could see the same courthouse steps where Officer Morrison had first humiliated him. The marble looked the same, but everything else had changed. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Chief Lisa Brooks entered, carrying a thick folder marked Annual Reform Report. Her face showed the weariness of someone rebuilding an entire institution from the ground up. "Your Honor, I wanted to personally deliver our progress report," Brooks said, setting the folder on Washington's desk. 12 months of reform by the numbers. Washington opened the file and studied the statistics. Traffic stops by race were now proportional to the population. Civilian complaints had dropped by 60%. Officer training hours had tripled, with mandatory constitutional law education every 6 months. "What about the culture change?" Washington asked, the question that mattered most. Brooks smiled for the first time in months. Yesterday, Officer Stevens, yes, Morrison's former partner, reported a colleague for using excessive force during an arrest. The complaint was investigated within 48 hours, and the officer was suspended pending review. The transformation Stevens had undergone was remarkable. The young officer who had once stood silently while his partner violated constitutional rights was now a vocal advocate for reform. He led training sessions on bystander intervention, teaching new recruits that silence in the face of misconduct was complicity. Washington's phone buzzed with a text from his daughter, Sophia. "Dad, saw your interview on 60 Minutes. So proud of how you handled everything. You changed the world without losing who you are." The media attention had been intense but necessary. Washington had given carefully measured interviews, always emphasizing that his experience, while painful, represented thousands of similar encounters that went unrecorded and unpunished. The real heroes, he had told CBS correspondent Anderson Cooper, are the ordinary citizens who refused to look away, who pulled out their phones and demanded accountability. Justice requires witnesses. Morrison was 3 months into his federal sentence, working in the prison library. Letters from his ex-wife mentioned their children's struggles with their father's public disgrace. His fall had consequences beyond his own life, rippling through his family and former colleagues. But Morrison's conviction had also saved lives. The FBI investigation revealed that his escalating behavior was heading toward tragedy. Body camera footage from his final weeks on duty showed increasing aggression and racial hostility that could have turned deadly. Washington picked up a letter from Jerome Williams, the construction worker who had been targeted by Morrison for years. Williams had written to thank the judge for giving him courage to speak up. "Your Honor, when I saw what happened to you, a federal judge in an expensive suit, I realized that if they could do that to you, what chance would people like me have? But your dignity and strength showed me that justice was possible. My lawsuit was settled last week. More importantly, my son isn't afraid of the police anymore." The ripple effects extended far beyond Metro City. The Washington case had become a catalyst for police reform legislation in 12 states. Body camera requirements expanded. Civilian oversight boards gained real authority. Training standards were elevated nationwide. Congress had passed the Federal Police Accountability Act, requiring all law enforcement agencies receiving federal funding to meet minimum constitutional training standards. The legislation was nicknamed the Washington Standard by civil rights advocates. Washington closed the reform report and looked out his window again. A group of diverse police officers was conducting a community outreach event on the courthouse plaza, talking with citizens instead of intimidating them. Children approached the officers without fear, their parents watching with cautious optimism. His intercom buzzed. "Your Honor, you have a sentencing hearing in 10 minutes. Washington straightened his robes and gathered his thoughts. Today he would sentence a drunk driver who had killed a family of 4. Justice would be served, but it would be measured, proportional, and constitutional. As he walked toward his courtroom, Washington reflected on the journey from that humiliating morning to this moment of quiet triumph. One incident had exposed systemic problems, but it had also demonstrated the power of truth, the strength of witnesses, and the possibility of redemption. The courtroom was full as always, but now Washington saw it differently. Every defendant deserved the same constitutional protections, regardless of their background. Every victim deserved justice, regardless of their status. Every officer deserved training that prepared them to serve all citizens with equal dignity. Standing at his bench, Washington looked out at the packed courtroom. Attorneys, defendants, families, police officers, and citizens. This was democracy in action, messy and imperfect, but striving toward the ideal of equal justice under law. "Court is now in session," Washington announced, his voice carrying the authority earned through adversity and the wisdom gained through suffering. Justice wasn't just an abstract concept discussed in law schools. It was a living principle that required constant vigilance, courage, and hope. The gavel fell, and the work of justice continued. Have you ever witnessed injustice and wondered if one person's courage could really change an entire system? Judge Washington's story proves that it can. When good people stand up, when witnesses refuse to look away, when truth confronts power, transformation becomes possible. What will you do the next time you see injustice? Will you record it, report it, or walk away? Like this video if you believe in equal justice for all. Share it to spread awareness about police accountability. Subscribe for more stories where courage triumphs over corruption. Remember, true justice isn't just about punishment, it's about transformation. The question isn't whether justice will prevail, but whether we'll be brave enough to demand it. Drop a comment below. What role should citizens play in holding police accountable? How can we build trust while ensuring safety? Hit that notification bell and join our community of people who believe that dignity, respect, and constitutional rights aren't negotiable. They're the foundation of a just society. Because in the end, justice delayed may be justice denied, but justice delivered with courage and wisdom can change the world. "Wrong place, wrong skin," he spat, shoving the teen against the wall before flicking his forehead with the championship ring. Silence fell like a guillotine. 500 spectators froze, breaths held captive. Champion Vance Reed towered over the young black competitor, his knuckles white around the prestigious Golden Dragon trophy. Devin Wilson, only 17, didn't flinch, not when the ring left its mark, not when whispers sliced through the tournament hall. "This arena belongs to those who honor true lineage," Vance growled, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Not outsiders who disrespect tradition." Devin's pulse remained steady. His eyes, focused, ancient somehow, betrayed nothing but certainty. "I've waited 5 years for this moment, Mr. Reed." The teen's voice carried unexpected authority. I wouldn't be anywhere else. Murmurs erupted. A judge shifted uncomfortably. No one intervened. Vance's nostrils flared. Then I'll teach you a permanent lesson about respect. He jabbed a finger into Devon's chest, in front of everyone. Devon simply nodded, a response so measured it visibly unnerved the champion. The countdown to humiliation had begun. The Golden Dragon Tournament represented the pinnacle of traditional martial arts competition in the country. Held annually in a converted historic theater with ornate dragon carvings adorning century-old columns, it attracted the most dedicated practitioners from across the nation. The air smelled of polished wood, ceremonial incense, and anticipation. Banners displaying the ancient creed in elegant calligraphy hung from the rafters. Honor, discipline, tradition. On the main floor, Vance Reed conducted his pre-tournament demonstration with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. His movements were precise, powerful, flowing from one form to another with theatrical flourish that drew appreciative gasps from the audience. 5 championship medals gleamed on the display table behind him, physical testament to his dominance of the sport. The true art, Vance announced to the crowd as he completed his final sequence, requires lifelong dedication to the authentic traditions passed down through proper channels. He bowed deeply to the panel of 7 judges, all elderly masters except one middle-aged woman who had recently joined their ranks. I am merely a vessel for preserving what our ancestors entrusted to us. The applause was thunderous. Several spectators rose to their feet. In sharp contrast, Devon's entrance through the side door caused barely a ripple. He carried a worn gym bag with a small community center logo, its strap frayed at the edges. No team surrounded him. No coach offered last-minute advice. He approached the registration table quietly, submitted his forms, and stepped back to wait. The tournament director frowned at his paperwork. Wilson Community Center? I'm not familiar with this dojo. It's not a dojo, sir. It's a community recreation center in East Side. Devon's voice remained respectful but unwavering. The director exchanged glances with an assistant. East Side. That's the... I've met all qualifying requirements, Devon interjected softly. Regional semifinals, 3rd place or higher. The director nodded reluctantly, stamping the form. A small crowd had gathered, watching the exchange with undisguised curiosity. As Devon turned to find his assigned preparation area, Vance Reed accidentally bumped into him, knocking his water bottle to the floor. The plastic container rolled, spilling its contents across the polished wood. Careful where you step, boy, Vance whispered, barely moving his lips. Wouldn't want to soil the competition floor. Devon knelt to retrieve the bottle, his expression unchanged. My father always said the true measure of a martial artist is found in how they treat those they consider beneath them. Something flickered across Vance's face. Irritation, perhaps surprise, before his practiced smile returned. He walked away without responding, rejoining his entourage of students and admirers. From his bag, Devon removed a small, worn photograph. A young man in tournament guy, standing proudly with a trophy much smaller than Vance's current collection. The date stamped in the corner read, 20 years earlier. Devon touched the image briefly before carefully returning it to an inner pocket. The preliminary bracket assignments were posted, drawing competitors to the display board. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the gathering. They've put the newcomer in the champions division? With that record? He'll be eliminated in the first round. Devon scanned the listings without reaction, noting his position in what was clearly the most difficult bracket. Every opponent was at least a second-degree black belt with multiple tournament placements. From the judges' table, one elderly judge, Master Haruto Tanaka, his face weathered by decades of practice, studied Devon with unexpected interest. His eyes narrowed, head tilting slightly as if trying to place a half-remembered face. The bracket assignments are final, announced the tournament director, sensing the undercurrent of discussion. Tradition dictates respect for the judge's decisions. Devon bowed slightly toward the announcement and moved to prepare for his first match. Devon's preliminary match began with little fanfare. His opponent, a stocky competitor with 3 regional titles to his name, approached with the confidence of someone expecting an easy victory. The referee signaled the start, and the crowd settled in for what they assumed would be a quick elimination. What followed defied expectations. Devon moved with fluid efficiency, neither flashy nor aggressive, yet somehow always just beyond his opponent's reach. His blocks connected with precision, his counters measured and controlled. Most noticeable was his economy of movement. No wasted energy, no unnecessary flourishes. When he scored points, they came from fundamental techniques executed with flawless timing. "Strange," muttered a coach from the sidelines. "His basics are perfect, but he's holding something back." By the match's midpoint, Devon led by a modest margin. His opponent's frustration manifested in increasingly aggressive attacks, which Devon continued to neutralize with the same calm efficiency. The crowd's attention shifted, whispers spreading as they recognized they were witnessing something unexpected. The match paused for a 1-minute break. Devon stood quietly, breathing controlled, while his opponent received animated coaching from his team. From across the room, Vance Reed watched, his expression hardening. Before the referee could resume the match, Vance approached the edge of the mat. "Stop!" he called out, his voice cutting through the ambient noise. "This is inappropriate." The referee turned, confused. "Excuse me, Champion Reed? As head of the tournament's traditions committee, I have the right to question improper participation." Vance stepped onto the competition mat, a breach of protocol that no one dared challenge. "This boy claims training from a community center, yet performs techniques from our protected lineage." The tournament director hurried over. "Champion Reed, the match is in progress. This is about the integrity of our art." Vance's voice projected to ensure the entire hall could hear. He turned to face Devon directly. "Where did you learn these forms? Who is your master?" Devon lowered his hands to his sides. "I trained at Wilson Community Center in Eastside." "A community center?" Vance's tone made the words sound like an accusation. "No recognized master? No lineage?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some competitors exchanged uncomfortable glances, while others nodded in apparent agreement with Vance's concerns. "The center has a martial arts program," Devon replied evenly. "And who teaches this program?" Vance pressed, moving closer. "Various volunteers. My father initially, before he passed." Vance's smile was thin. "So, self-taught by a hobbyist. And you presume to enter the Golden Dragon?" He turned to address the audience. "This tournament honors centuries of properly transmitted knowledge, not weekend warriors playing at martial arts in community centers." Several spectators laughed. Devon's opponent stepped back, clearly uncomfortable with the interruption, but unwilling to challenge the champion. "Your stance is all wrong," Vance declared, suddenly seizing Devon's shoulders and forcefully repositioning him. "This is the proper tiger guard position in our tradition." The physical contact crossed a line. From the judge's table, Master Tanaka stood up. "Champion Reed, this behavior is essential to preserving standards," Vance interrupted. "Would you have us dilute generations of knowledge?" He maintained his grip on Devon's shoulders, fingers digging in. "Perhaps our young friend would benefit from proper instruction?" Devon remained still under Vance's hands, his expression unchanged. "In fact," Vance continued, releasing Devon with a small shove, "perhaps a demonstration would be educational for everyone. Since you've made it to the preliminaries with your community center training, perhaps you'd appreciate the opportunity to learn from a true master." The implication hung in the air. Devon looked directly at Vance for the first time since their initial encounter. Perhaps Mr. Reed would prefer to test my skills himself, rather than simply dismissing them. The question, delivered with calm sincerity rather than challenge, created a ripple of surprise through the audience. Someone in the back let out a low whistle. Vance's eyes narrowed. "You want a lesson from the master himself? In front of everyone?" He laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Your funeral, kid." Devon nodded once. "I would be honored by the opportunity." The crowd's reaction was mixed, some excited by the prospect of seeing the champion in action against the upstart, others visibly uncomfortable with the public humiliation they sensed was coming. A few spectators exchanged troubled glances, the atmosphere shifting from entertainment to something more unsettling. "The boy has courage, if not sense," someone remarked from the sidelines. Master Tanaka had remained standing, his weathered face unreadable. He slowly sat back down, but his gaze never left Devon's face. The tournament director cleared his throat, clearly caught off guard by the unexpected development. After a brief, hurried consultation with the judges, he addressed the gathered crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, an unusual but not unprecedented situation has arisen." His voice carried the practiced neutrality of someone navigating delicate protocol. "Champion Reed has invoked the tradition of the honor match." A buzz of excitement rippled through the audience. Many leaned forward in their seats, while others whispered explanations to confused newcomers. "For those unfamiliar with our traditions," the director continued, "the honor match dates back to the founding of our art. When questions of legitimacy or proper representation arise, two practitioners may engage in formal demonstration to resolve the matter." An assistant appeared, carrying an ornate wooden box inlaid with mother-of-pearl. The director opened it reverently, revealing an aged parchment scroll. Per tradition, both participants must clearly understand the stakes. He unrolled the scroll carefully. "The honor match is not merely exhibition. It carries formal consequences according to our oldest customs." Vance stepped forward, his posture commanding. "The loser must kneel before the winner, publicly acknowledge their inferior understanding of the art, and relinquish any titles or claims to lineage knowledge." The director nodded. "These are the traditional terms. With one addition," Vance added. "When I win, the boy must also admit his false pretense and agree never to compete in any recognized tournament again." His smile was razor-thin. "To protect the integrity of our traditions." A few gasps emerged from the crowd. Even by the standards of the honor match, these were unusually harsh terms. All eyes turned to Devon, expecting hesitation or protest. Instead, the teenager simply nodded. "I accept." The lack of negotiation visibly unsettled Vance, whose smile faltered momentarily before returning with renewed confidence. "Then it's settled," the director declared, though uncertainty colored his tone. He gestured to the scroll. "According to tradition, both participants will sign the formal contract." The signing ceremony proceeded with ceremonial gravity. The scroll was placed on a small lacquered table. First Vance, then Devon, signed their names with a traditional brush pen. Following custom, each pressed their right thumb to an ink pad and placed their print beside their signature. "The blood thumbprint is symbolic now," the director explained, though historically it was quite literal. Devon's calm throughout the procedure seemed to increasingly irritate Vance, whose movements became more pronounced, almost theatrical, as if trying to impress upon the teenager the seriousness of what was transpiring. "The honor match will conclude tomorrow's events," announced the director, rolling the scroll and returning it to its box. "Immediately preceding the championship finals." "Perfect," Vance said loudly. "Everyone will be here to witness it." He leaned closer to Devon. "Do you understand what's at stake, boy? Everything. Your future, your dignity, all gone tomorrow." Devon met his gaze steadily. "I understand perfectly what my father lost to you 20 years ago. Tomorrow is about much more than a title." Something flickered across Vance's face, confusion, perhaps a moment of uncertainty, before he turned away without response, rejoining his students who immediately surrounded him with eager attention. As the crowd dispersed, Master Tanaka approached Devon quietly. The elderly judge moved with the careful precision of age, yet his eyes remained sharp and clear. "Young man," he said, his voice low, "I feel I should warn you about honoring the true way." Devon looked at him, waiting. "There is honor in respect," Tanaka continued, "but also in truth. Choose which you will defend tomorrow wisely." With that cryptic statement, he bowed slightly and walked away. Devon stood alone in the center of the tournament floor, the signed contract binding him to a confrontation that suddenly seemed to carry the weight of decades. The preparation area emptied as competitors and spectators dispersed for the evening. Devon remained, sitting cross-legged in a corner of the locker room. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his face as he breathed deeply, rhythmically. From his bag, he removed the worn photograph he'd glanced at earlier. Now, alone, he studied it intently. The image showed a younger man, clearly his father standing proud in traditional GI, a small trophy in hand. The resemblance between them was striking. The same determined eyes, the same composed posture. Devon traced the outline of his father's face with his fingertip. "First step done, Dad," he whispered. His mind drifted back through the years, memories surfacing like bubbles in still water. 20 years earlier, James Wilson had been a rising star in the martial arts community. Self-taught initially, he had refined his knowledge through dedicated study and practice, eventually earning recognition for his exceptional skill and understanding of the art's deepest principles. The tournament that year, this same Golden Dragon tournament, was to be his breakthrough into the highest echelons of recognition. Devon remembered the stories, told and retold during evening practices at their small apartment, then later at the community center his father had established to bring martial arts to underserved youth in East Side. "Your father was magnificent," his mother had often said. "He moved like water powerful but adaptable, never forcing, always finding the natural path." But then came the semifinal match against young Vance Reed, an aggressive competitor from a wealthy dojo with political connections to the tournament organizers. What should have been James Wilson's crowning achievement became his downfall. Devon closed his eyes, his father's voice echoing from those late-night conversations. He used illegal techniques, strikes, to pressure points that are forbidden in competition. When I scored a clear point, it was called invalid. When I blocked legally, I was penalized for excessive contact. The defeat itself wasn't what destroyed James Wilson. It was what came after the public humiliation, the accusations of improper training, the whispers that followed him. Doors that had been opening suddenly closed. Students drifted away from his small dojo, parents unwilling to entrust their children to an instructor whose legitimacy had been so publicly questioned. Depression followed, then financial struggle. The community center program became his father's sole focus, his way of preserving what he believed about martial arts, that its true value lay in building character, not collecting trophies. "Never let someone else define your worth, Devon," his father had told him repeatedly during those difficult years. "The true path isn't about recognition, it's about alignment with principles that endure." When James Wilson died 3 years ago, his health broken by stress and disappointment, 15-year-old Devon made a promise at his bedside. He would restore his father's honor, not for vengeance, but for truth. Devon opened his eyes, returning to the present moment. From a hidden compartment in his bag, he removed a small, leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age, the binding cracked and worn. Carefully, he opened it to reveal hand-drawn illustrations of martial arts techniques, annotated in faded ink. The book looked centuries old because it was. This was the original text of the Shadow Palm lineage, the authentic manuscript that documented the art in its purest form, before commercialization and politics had corrupted its transmission. His father had received it from his teacher, who had preserved it through wars and cultural revolutions, ensuring the true knowledge survived. What Vance Reed taught and claimed to master was a diluted version, modified for competitions and public appeal. He couldn't know, the deeper principles contained in these fragile pages. After his father's death, Devon had sought out the one person who could help him master the authentic techniques, Master Zhang, the elderly teacher who had gone into seclusion in the mountains after becoming disillusioned with the politics of modern martial arts competitions. For 2 years, Devon had trained in secret, learning the true shadow palm techniques that few living practitioners had ever witnessed. Devon practiced a breathing sequence now, his hands moving through a subtle pattern that would be unrecognizable to most observers as a martial technique. It was the foundation of the shadow palm, not the external power that Vance demonstrated, but the internal energy cultivation that made the style truly effective. A noise at the door interrupted his meditation. Master Tanaka stood there, watching with knowing eyes. "I thought I recognized that movement pattern," the elderly judge said quietly. "The shadow palm technique. Your father was the last to master it before." He paused, entering the room fully and closing the door. "Be careful, young one. Vance will stop at nothing to protect his false legacy." Devon carefully returned the book to his bag. "You knew my father." It wasn't a question, but Tanaka nodded. "I was outvoted during that match 20 years ago. Politics and tradition are not always the same thing, though many pretend they are." He studied Devon's face. "You move exactly like him." "My father died believing he had failed the true way," Devon said, touching the photograph once more. "Tomorrow isn't about me, it's about the truth." Tanaka's expression softened slightly. "I will maintain my oath as judge, but know this. True mastery reveals itself, even to those who refuse to see." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Your secret is safe with me, but tomorrow it will belong to everyone." After the elderly judge departed, Devon returned to his meditation. Tomorrow would require perfect control, not just of technique, but of emotion. The path to restoration wasn't through hatred or revenge, but through the purest expression of the art itself. By noon the following day, the tournament hall had filled beyond capacity. Word of the unusual honor match had spread rapidly, drawing martial arts enthusiasts from neighboring communities. Extra chairs had been hastily arranged, yet people still stood 3 deep along the walls. The air felt charged, thick with anticipation and the mingled scents of excitement cologne, coffee, and the distinct aroma of the ceremonial incense burning in copper dishes at the corners of the main competition area. The central mat had been specially prepared for the occasion. Traditional red-tasseled ropes defined its boundaries, and ancient calligraphy banners hung on each wall: honor, discipline, wisdom, truth. Tournament officials moved with heightened formality, conscious of the historical significance that such matches held in their tradition. A drum sounded 3 times, signaling the ceremony's beginning. The crowd fell silent as the tournament director stepped to the center. "Today we witness the ancient tradition of the honor match," he announced, voice carrying to the farthest corners. "A sacred opportunity to distinguish true understanding from mere appearance." From the eastern entrance, Vance Reed emerged to enthusiastic applause. He wore formal demonstration attire, a black silk gi with gold embroidery depicting dragons along its edges. The 5 championship medallions displayed prominently on a red sash across his chest. 6 senior students accompanied him, each carrying an element of traditional weaponry that represented aspects of their lineage. Vance stepped onto the mat and performed the formal entry ritual, a flowing sequence of movements that showcased strength, precision, and theatrical flair. His techniques created audible wind sounds as they cut through the air, drawing appreciative murmurs from many spectators. He concluded with a perfect split, arms extended in the tiger crane position that had become his signature pose in promotional materials. "Champion Reed honors us with the Dragon Tiger entry form," the director commented. "A demonstration of our art's highest external expression." The applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Several people rose to their feet. Vance acknowledged them with practiced humility, bowing in each direction before taking his position at the northern edge of the mat. The contrast when Devon entered couldn't have been more pronounced. He came alone, wearing a simple white GI with no markings or decorations. No belt indicated his rank. He carried nothing, his hands empty at his sides. His entry involved no elaborate demonstration, just a respectful bow to the judges and a simple centering breath before he took his position at the southern edge. "Mr. Wilson honors the principle of simplicity," the director noted, though his tone suggested uncertainty about whether this constituted proper protocol. A few scattered claps sounded, quickly fading to uncomfortable silence. Someone whispered loudly enough to be heard in nearby rows, "Did he even warm up?" Master Tanaka, seated at the center of the judges' panel, watched Devon with unwavering attention. The other judges leaned together, exchanging quiet comments behind raised hands. The director raised his arm. "Per tradition, before combat commences, each participant may demonstrate their understanding of the art." Vance stepped forward immediately. "I will perform the 5-element sequence, the protected knowledge of our lineage, passed down through 28 generations of recognized masters." What followed was undeniably impressive, a flowing demonstration of techniques that built from simple strikes to acrobatic combinations, each movement executed with power and precision. Vance moved like a hurricane across the mat, his techniques punctuated with sharp ki shouts that echoed off the walls. The crowd responded with appropriate awe, gasping at particularly difficult sequences. When he finished, breathing controlled despite the exertion, the audience erupted in applause. Vance bowed deeply, first to the judges, then to the audience, noticeably less so toward Devon. "Mr. Wilson," the director called, "your demonstration." Devon stepped forward and simply performed the first basic form, the most elementary sequence taught to beginners. His movements were precise but utterly without embellishment, focused entirely on fundamental principles of balance, breathing, and alignment. What stood out wasn't showmanship but an almost preternatural calmness, each position held with complete stability, transitions between movements seamless as water flowing. The audience's response was confused. Some laughed quietly, assuming they were witnessing nervousness or limited knowledge. Others frowned, perhaps sensing something they couldn't quite articulate. "Is he mocking us?" someone asked loudly. Master Tanaka's expression remained inscrutable, his eyes never leaving Devon's form. The demonstration complete, the director moved to the center again. "The honor match will proceed in 3 rounds, following traditional rules. Victory may come through point accumulation or clear demonstration of superior technique. Judges will evaluate according to ancient standards of form, power, control, and spiritual alignment." As the competitors took their starting positions, Vance's confident smile contrasted sharply with Devon's calm neutrality. "Begin," called the director, stepping back quickly. Vance attacked immediately, closing distance with an aggressive combination of strikes aimed at Devon's midsection. The movements were technically excellent, fast, powerful, precisely targeted. Yet Devon simply wasn't there when the attacks arrived. With minimal movement, he shifted just enough that each strike passed harmlessly through empty space. This pattern continued for nearly a minute, Vance pressing forward with increasingly complex attacks, Devon neutralizing them with seemingly effortless adjustments of position and timing. No counterattacks, no offensive techniques, just perfect defensive awareness. "Fight back properly," Vance demanded between combinations. "Stop mocking me with these basics." Devon maintained his composed expression, responding only with precise execution of fundamental techniques. When he finally countered, it was with the simplest of movements, a basic palm block that subtly redirected Vance's energy, causing him to slightly overextend. That small overextension revealed a critical flaw in Vance's signature technique, a weight distribution issue that compromised its structural integrity. The insight was visible only to the most experienced observers, including Master Tanaka, whose eyebrow raised fractionally. Vance recovered quickly, but his expression had changed. The confidence was giving way to confusion, then the first hints of genuine frustration. His next sequence came faster, harder, with subtle variations that bent the competition rules strikes that targeted vulnerable points, joint manipulations disguised as standard blocks. Devon's adaptation remained perfect. His defensive pattern shifted imperceptibly, always just beyond Vance's reach or timing. Still, he launched no significant counterattack, seemingly content to let the engagement reveal itself naturally. The first round ended with neither competitor having scored decisively. As they returned to their positions, whispers spread through the audience. The expected dominance hadn't materialized. Instead, something strange was unfolding. A contest that didn't follow the anticipated script. "That's not anger in his movements," observed an elderly practitioner near the front. "That's discipline I haven't seen in 20 years. The second round began with Vance visibly recalibrating his approach. He circled more patiently, studying Devon's positioning with narrowed eyes. When he attacked, his combinations were more controlled, more strategic, testing defenses rather than trying to overwhelm them. Devon responded with subtle adjustments to his own rhythm, maintaining the defensive integrity that had frustrated Vance's initial approach. For several exchanges, they moved in an almost hypnotic pattern of attack and evasion, like two opposing currents in the same stream. Then Vance found what he thought was an opening, a momentary shift in Devon's weight distribution during a pivoting defense. He committed fully to a penetrating strike, only to discover the opening was a deliberate drawing technique. Devon's counter wasn't flashy, just fundamentally perfect, a simple palm redirection that used Vance's own momentum to unbalance him. For the first time, Vance nearly fell. He recovered with athletic skill, but the near stumble was visible to everyone. A murmur spread through the crowd. The champion's composure cracked further. His next attacks contained increasingly obvious rule violations. A finger strike toward Devon's eyes disguised as a conventional attack, a sweep targeting the knee joint with potentially injurious force. Devon's response remained measured, his defenses adapting without escalating the dangerous elements Vance was introducing. But now, occasionally, he added simple counter techniques, nothing flashy, just perfectly timed basic strikes that scored clean technical points. By the final minute of the second round, the mood in the arena had transformed. The audience watched in growing disbelief as the expected dominance inverted itself. The champion was breathing heavily, movements becoming less precise as frustration affected his technique. The newcomer remained composed, his breathing controlled, movements economical and precise. The third round began with Vance abandoning pretense. His attacks became overtly aggressive, prioritizing power over technique, seeking to overwhelm through sheer force and intimidation. When those failed, he resorted to increasingly obvious violations, grabbing Devon's GI, attempting to trap fingers, even a disguised strike toward the throat. Through it all, Devon maintained his disciplined approach. His defense never faltered, his counters remained minimal, but precisely effective. More telling was his complete emotional control. No reaction to provocations, no response to Vance's increasingly desperate tactics. The audience had gone completely silent, the only sounds the impact of techniques and Vance's increasingly labored breathing. Even those who had initially laughed at Devon's simple demonstration now watched with undisguised fascination. Something extraordinary was happening, though few could articulate exactly what they were witnessing. Master Tanaka sat forward slightly, his usual impassivity giving way to the faintest suggestion of a nod. The final minute of the match approached. Vance Reed, 5-time champion and self-proclaimed guardian of tradition, stood breathing heavily, his perfect appearance now disheveled. Sweat darkened his ornate guy, and a muscle twitched visibly at his temple. His calculated composure had disintegrated into raw frustration. "Enough of this," Vance growled, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Time to end your charade." He reset his stance, centering himself with visible effort. The audience sensed a shift in energy. Vance was preparing something significant. Competitors from his dojo straightened in their seats, recognizing the preparation for his legendary Dragon's Tail technique, the signature move that had won him 3 championships, supposedly unblockable when executed properly. "He's going to use it," whispered one of Vance's senior students. "The boy doesn't stand a chance." Vance began the elaborate setup sequence, his movements regaining their earlier precision as he committed fully to his ultimate technique. The Dragon's Tail required perfect timing, a complex feint followed by an explosive circular strike that attacked from an unexpected angle. Its power came from complete commitment, the practitioner channeling their entire body's energy into a single decisive moment. Devon watched, his expression unchanged, his breathing steady. As Vance launched the technique, committing his full force to the attack, Devon made a single, almost imperceptible shift in his stance. What happened next occurred so quickly that many spectators would later disagree about the details. As Vance's attack reached its culmination, Devon executed a perfect shadow palm counter, not the modified version taught in commercial dojos, but the authentic technique preserved in the ancient manuscript. His hand moved in a precise pattern, intercepting Vance's energy pathway rather than his physical strike. The result was extraordinary. Vance's own force reversed against him, his momentum suddenly having nowhere to go. He staggered backward, balance completely compromised, eyes widening in shock. More telling than the physical reaction was his expression, the sudden recognition, the impossible realization. "That technique!" Vance gasped, steadying himself. "It can't be. Only the true bloodline of—" His voice trailed off as understanding dawned. Devon stood perfectly balanced, his hand still extended in the distinctive position that concluded the authentic shadow palm technique, a position illustrated in the ancient texts, but absent from the modified versions taught in modern dojos. The silence in the arena was absolute. Even those who didn't fully comprehend the technical significance could feel the seismic shift that had occurred. Something fundamental had been revealed. "Impossible," Vance whispered, but the doubt in his voice betrayed his crumbling certainty. Devon lowered his hand slowly, then extended it toward Vance, not in attack, but in a gesture of reconciliation. "My father tried to show you the same mercy 20 years ago. History doesn't have to repeat itself." For a moment, it seemed Vance might accept the offered hand. A flicker of recognition, perhaps even remorse, crossed his face. Then his expression hardened. With a roar of denial, he launched himself forward in a desperate, rule-breaking attack aimed directly at Devon's throat. Devon didn't counter. He simply wasn't there. With minimal movement, he shifted aside, allowing Vance's wild attack to pass harmlessly by and allowing the champion's own momentum to carry him forward until he lost balance completely. Vance fell hard, his knee twisting awkwardly beneath him. The sound, a sharp, unpleasant pop, echoed through the silent arena. He collapsed to the mat, clutching his injured joint, his face contorted with the twin pains of physical injury and public defeat. The match was over. Not through any damaging attack by Devon, but through Vance's own desperation, his own refusal to accept what had become increasingly obvious to everyone watching. Master Tanaka rose slowly from his seat, the other judges following his lead. No formal announcement was needed. The outcome was written in Vance Reed's collapse and Devon Wilson's calm, unwavering stance. The tournament hall remained eerily silent as medical attendants helped Vance to a seated position. His knee injury, while painful, appeared not to be severe, a strain rather than a tear. The physical recovery would be straightforward. The recovery of his reputation presented a far more challenging prospect. The tournament director approached, carrying the ceremonial honor match scroll. Tradition demanded a formal conclusion public acknowledgement of the outcome, regardless of how uncomfortable that might be for the defeated. "According to ancient custom," the director announced, his voice subdued, "the honor match has concluded. The formal ceremony of recognition must now take place." Vance's face contorted, emotions warring visibly: humiliation, anger, and something deeper, more complex. He remained seated on the mat, one hand still protectively covering his injured knee, the other clenched in a tight fist against the floor. "Champion Reed," the director continued, following protocol despite the tension, "tradition requires your acknowledgement." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was the moment of public consequence, the price of Vance's earlier confidence and harsh conditions. By his own terms, he was required to kneel, though his injury now made that difficult, admit inferiority, relinquish his titles, and acknowledge false claims to lineage knowledge. Vance's hesitation stretched uncomfortably. Several of his students looked away, unable to watch their master's humiliation. Others leaned forward, curiosity overcoming empathy. The silence grew heavier with each passing second. Devon stepped forward. His voice, when he spoke, carried clearly through the hushed arena. "Before we proceed, I should properly introduce myself." He bowed formally to the judges' panel. "My name is Devon Wilson. I am the son of Master James Wilson." The name triggered immediate recognition among the older participants. Whispers spread rapidly through the crowd as those who remembered explained to those who didn't. 20 years ago, my father competed in this tournament. His understanding of our art was questioned, his character attacked, his legitimacy denied." Devon's voice remained measured, without bitterness. "Today wasn't about winning a match. It was about restoring truth." From his GI, Devon withdrew a folded document yellowed with age, its edges worn. He handed it to the tournament director. "This is the original certificate of lineage, signed by Grand Master Zhang, acknowledging my father as the 19th generation heir to the authentic Shadow Palm tradition." The director examined the document, then passed it to Master Tanaka, whose hands trembled slightly as he verified its authenticity. "The techniques you just witnessed," Devon continued, addressing the entire assembly rather than just Vance, "come from the original manuscript of our art, not the modified versions that prioritize competition success over authentic principles." From the sidelines, one of Devon's supporters brought forward the leather-bound book he had meditated with the previous evening. Master Tanaka accepted it reverently, turning its brittle pages with the care of someone handling a sacred relic. "The Shadow Palm lineage has never been about bloodlines or schools or trophies," Devon said. "It has been preserved by those committed to its true principles. Harmony over dominance, wisdom over power, character over reputation." Vance stared at the ancient text, recognition and disbelief warring in his expression. "That's the original manuscript," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I was told it was lost, centuries ago." "It was protected," Devon corrected gently, "by those who understood its true value." Vance's demeanor transformed. The remaining defiance drained away, replaced by a complex mixture of shame and revelation. With visible effort, he shifted his position, moving into as close to a formal kneeling posture as his injured knee would allow. "I knew," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I knew 20 years ago that your father's technique came from a more authentic source than mine. I could feel it during our match." He lowered his gaze to the mat. "But admitting that would have meant acknowledging everything I'd built was founded on incomplete understanding. My teachers had only fragments, commercialized versions. When your father demonstrated the true form, I couldn't bear to see what it revealed about my own training." A shocked murmur spread through Vance's students. Their champion, their exemplar of traditional values, was confessing to knowingly perpetuating falsehood. "I've spent 20 years defending a lie because I couldn't face my own inadequacy," Vance continued, his voice strengthening with the release of long-carried deception. "The true dishonor was never in losing. It was in how I won, and what I did afterward." He reached for his championship medals, removing them from his neck with unsteady hands. "These were earned through skill, but not through honor." He placed them on the mat. "I forfeit them freely." Then, From within his G, Vance withdrew something unexpected, a small, tarnished medal. This belonged to your father. I kept it after he was disqualified on my false accusations. It should return to its rightful owner. Devon accepted the medal, examining the inscription that bore his father's name. For the first time, his composed expression wavered, emotion briefly visible before he regained control. Master Tanaka stood addressing the assembly. Today we have witnessed not just an honor match, but a restoration of historical truth. He bowed deeply to Devon. The council acknowledges Devon Wilson as the legitimate heir to the Shadow Palm lineage, with all rights and responsibilities that entails. The formal pronouncement rippled through the crowd, many spectators still processing the dramatic revelations they had witnessed. Some of Vance's former supporters looked confused, even betrayed. Others appeared thoughtful, reassessing long-held assumptions. Devon stepped forward, offering his hand once more to Vance. This time, Vance accepted it, allowing Devon to help him to his feet. True mastery isn't about who your ancestors were or what you look like, Devon said, his voice carrying to the farthest corners of the now silent arena. It's about honoring the spirit of the art through how you treat others. My father never sought vengeance or exclusive recognition. He opened a community center, making these teachings available to anyone willing to approach them with sincerity. Vance nodded slowly. I would like to learn the authentic form, properly this time, without ego. The community center doors are always open, Devon replied. In the following weeks, the martial arts community buzzed with the story of what had transpired at the Golden Dragon tournament. Some focused on the technical revelations, others on the dramatic personal narrative. Attendance at the Wilson Community Center tripled, with practitioners from across the country seeking authentic instruction. More surprising to many was the occasional presence of Vance Reed, now without his championship titles, but with something more valuable: humility and genuine studentship. He began assisting with classes, his technical knowledge still valuable when guided by proper principles. 6 months later, at a regional exhibition, Devon and Vance performed a demonstration together, a symbolic public reconciliation that emphasized the art's ability to transform not just bodies, but character. Their performance illustrated how different paths could ultimately serve the same deeper principles when approached with sincerity. The Shadow Palm lineage, nearly lost through politics and commercialization, found new life, not as an exclusive secret guarded by a few, but as a tradition kept vibrant through ethical teaching and respect for its authentic spirit. Devon Wilson had restored not just his father's personal honor, but the integrity of an art form that transcended individual reputation. Some people train their bodies for decades but never master the first lesson, Devon told a group of new students, Vance nodding in agreement beside him. True strength begins with humility. If this tale of redemption and authentic martial arts wisdom resonated with you, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to Beat Stories for more powerful narratives that deliver justice with a punch. Every week, we bring you carefully crafted stories of underdogs rising, bullies facing consequences, and powerful moments of truth that will leave you satisfied and inspired. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, so you never miss our weekly uploads of satisfying comeuppance stories that prove respect and dignity always win in the end. This is Beat Stories, where justice is served one story at a time.
They say it's just how the world works. We say, change it. At Beat Stories, we capture the exact moment when justice meets its match. Subscribe if you're tired of the same excuses wrapped in different uniforms.